PGA Tour is back in the contiguous 48 after a 2-week hiatus, 2-week kick, I should say, out in Hawaii. The West Coast swing begins this week at the American Express out in California. Unfortunately, the stud of the week, Jon Rahm, did withdraw, but we still have a handful of big names at the top. The win odds at FanDuel Sportsbook are pretty flat, as you can see here. So, how does that going to affect the betting picks for the week? How should it affect the daily fantasy strategy on FanDuel? We'll dig into that, the field, the course, or this week courses, win simulations. Anything else you'd like to cover, just hit up the comments section on YouTube if you have questions for this week's event. But welcome on in to the FanDuel PGA Q&A for this week's PGA Tour event, the American Express. I'm your host, Brandon Gdula. I'm the managing editor over at numberFire.com. I'll be breaking down this week's event, the courses, the PGA West Stadium course, the Nicklaus Tournament course, looking at the best betting odds on FanDuel Sportsbook, some of the best values on FanDuel for daily fantasy, checking out the best golfers based on my win simulation model for this week. This week we have a full field event, which means that we do have a cut, but if you're digging back, doing some research of your own, just know that this event has gone by like a dozen different names. So you want to look at the course, specifically the stadium course for this week, where we will see 3 of the 4 rounds be played as opposed to 2 historically. That the reason for that is there's a bit of a different format. It used to be a 54-hole cut, 3-course rotation, a pro-am. But this year, because of COVID, it is a 36-hole cut with just 2 courses being used. There's no pro-am. What's it going to take to win? Who has the right stats? We'll get there. But again, if you have any questions about this week's field, this week's event, FanDuel Sportsbook odds, hit up the YouTube chat and I'll do my best to answer those questions. But let's start by breaking down the field, looking at FanDuel Sportsbook. At the top, we have Patrick Cantlay, 14-1, Brooks Koepka, 17-1, same as Scotty Scheffler, Patrick Reed, 19-1, Matthew Wolff, Sungjae Im, both 20-1, Tony Finau, 21-1, Abraham Answer, 28. But you probably make that cutoff at Tony Finau and up, and you look at the 7 favorites. I think that those 7 golfers on FanDuel as well do stand out for this week. Who's the best player? We can get into that. Spoiler alert, I like Patrick Reed. I'll talk more about him. But we have a pretty good field at the top. There are some interesting names at longer odds. Some guys who jump out to me at these particular odds on FanDuel Sportsbook. Lanto Griffin at 80-1. He's one of my win simulations favorite values for this week. I like Taylor Gooch, 85-1 again. Doc Redman, 85-1 as well. I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can bet this, a lot of different ways we can go from a daily fantasy standpoint. But, yes, we lost Jon Rahm, but it's still a good field overall. But let's look at the historic event data, hopping over to Data Golf and looking at some of the recent winners, see what jumps out here. Last year's winner, Andrew Landry, did so 26 under par. The year before, Adam Long, 26 under. Jon Rahm, 22 under. Hudson Swafford, 20 under. And then Jason Duffner, 25 under. So those are some pretty low scores overall. That means we are going to need we're going to need birdies. Bethany says she doesn't have a question. She just wanted to say, hey, Bethany, thanks for tuning in as always. But if we look at the specific course format, we can see, I like this page a lot because it shows which of the 4 strokes gained stats matter most for this event, but really we're looking at just the stadium course because it's the only one of the 3 courses where we do have strokes gain data. But you can see this number here, strokes gain approach, 38.1% of the scoring variation comes from strokes gain approach. It is always the most important tee to green stat. It is so again. It's about 3.4 points more important, about 3.5, I think 3.4, relative to the general PGA Tour stop. We see a de-emphasis on strokes gained around the green, which is generally almost always the least important of the 3. Strokes gained off the tee does jump down a little bit, but so does putting. It's about 36%. Oh, it's actually about the same. So what we really see here is a big boost to strokes gained approach. Now, the big question with strokes gained off the tee is it more of an accuracy course or a distance course? I'm going to stick with Data Golf here and look at their course fit tool. We can see the stadium course, which again should be the one you look at most often. Driving distance does jump out quite a bit relative to the average PGA Tour stop, and you can see accuracy is down a bit as well. But we do have one round from the where is this? It's an 87.7, I believe. I want to get this overlay here. The Nicklaus Tournament course. You can see here in the blue now, it's a little bit more dependent on accuracy than the average stop, but it's also dependent on distance primarily. So given the fact that we have 3 rounds at the stadium course, just 1 at the Nicklaus Tournament course, I would say distance should be prioritized well over accuracy for this week. And this is a really cool tool that Data Golf has developed. I got some questions last week about course history. Course history can matter, yes, but I think course fit, current form, is very important. On this page now, on their course fit tool, they show which golfers fit the course best, who you can kind of bump up most or bump down the most based on how they fit. Based on what we saw above, we should see that longer golfers get an advantage, and Cameron Champ jumps out number 1. He should play about 0.3 strokes per round better than his usual average, which is kind of a lot, if we're being honest, based on how this course plays out. Sam Burns, Brooks Koepka, Tony Finau, Matthew Wolff, some other longer golfers just getting a lot of leverage. Even these guys at the top. So that could help us separate. And then you can jump the whole way down here, see who's losing the most expected strokes just based on the fit. But I think this is a really important tool. And, again, I got questions last week about course history. I think that course fit is the most important. It's more important, relative to just how guys have played one random event in past years. So I think that's key this week. But if I had to give you some key stats to focus in on, strokes gained approach is number 1. Pretty much as always. Driving distance is number 2. Putting, yes, it can be hard to predict, but putting is not completely random. Elevating the importance of putting has been key for me, both in daily fantasy and in making sure that I'm not betting guys who really can't putt, because you almost always have to putt at above the field average baseline pretty well in order to secure a win. Justin Thomas, has done it with losing some strokes or with neutral putting, but the tee to green game has to be that much better. So strokes gained putting is 3rd on my list, and then birdie or better rate. We saw those scores, all 20 under or below over the past 5 years to win here. Should be scoreable. You kind of need that for this week. Now I'm going to hop over to my spreadsheet and look at the top of the field primarily. I think that from 11,000 and up on FanDuel is really where you would make the distinction for this week's studs. These golfers here, these 7, Patrick Cantlay, Brooks Koepka, Patrick Reed, Scotty Scheffler, Tony Finau, Sungjae Im, and Matthew Wolff. If you're looking closely, you can see who I have highlighted. It's Patrick Reed, Tony Finau, Matthew Wolff. The reason for that, well, we can dig into that, but you can see here, Patrick Reed, I already mentioned him, rates out pretty well in my win simulations. Trails only Patrick Cantlay. Just factor in, for the most part, long-term adjusted form. And it's been, pretty strong, pretty successful in recent weeks. So I think that is telling. It's very, very, very telling to me that Patrick Reed probably a little bit undervalued for this week. Matthew Wolff, not quite as good with the long-term adjusted form, but a really good course fit, because we can see him, just rate out really well from a stats standpoint. Let me freeze these here. But Matthew Wolff here ranks out in the 89th percentile in adjusted strokes gained from Data Golf over, since the start of 2020. Really good tee to green numbers, really good off the tee. We know that he is long, 95th percentile in driving distance gained over the past 100 rounds, according to fantasynational.com, 93rd percentile in birdie or better rate. And then pretty strong with the putting overall, 67th percentile on Bermuda, 77th percentile overall. So good putter, long, good irons, should be a good course fit for this week. So I like Matthew Wolff for daily fantasy purposes, even if the win simulations don't necessarily love him. Tony Finau, very similar player to Matthew Wolff. Really good, best tee to green player when adjusted for field strength, relative to this particular field. Amazing ball striking, 95th percentile or better in both strokes gained off the tee and strokes gained approach, which are the two ball striking stats. Really good around the green. We just know that the putting isn't always there for Finau, but it's also not a red flag. He's not toward the bottom of the field, closer to field average on Bermuda. So I think Tony Finau is in play. But then we go back up to Patrick Reed. Yes, I went distance this week based on the stats. Percentile in driving distance, but 87th percentile in Bermuda putting, and 77th percentile or better in all three tee to green stats, and just one of the best putters for the fields he's in. So I'm going to build around for FanDuel. My lineups they're going to be built around Patrick Reed, Tony Finau, Matthew Wolff. I have no issue really with Scotty Scheffler, Sungjae Im, Patrick Cantlay. Brooks is always harder from a daily fantasy standpoint, just because his level of engagement can be sort of in and out, let's say. Yes, he can very easily win this thing. He's that good. But overall, Brooks does have some question marks that don't necessarily show up, on a spreadsheet. They're more his health, more his engagement for a particular week. But he does have the distance, does have the Bermuda putting. So I would not say to fade Brooks Koepka by any means. Just doesn't rate out as a particularly strong value overall. But we do have some, without Jon Rahm, it's a little bit more of a balanced field. We see that in the win odds being fairly flat overall. The 10,000 range is pretty intriguing to a degree, all things considered. We have Abraham Answer, Kevin Na, last week's winner, big name in Ricky Fowler, big hitter in Cameron Champ, pretty big name, good tee to green player in Paul Casey, Adam Long, former winner, Sam Burns, big name Phil Mickelson, and Lanto Griffin at 10,000. It's a pretty interesting tier from a FanDuel perspective. If you're watching closely, you can see that I have three names highlighted in that tier: Cameron Champ, Sam Burns, and Lanto Griffin. Starting with Champ here, the reason for it, pretty obvious. I went distance. He's got it. Longest driver in the field over the past 100 rounds in terms of driving distance gained over the fields he's faced, according to fantasynational.com. Best long-term adjusted strokes gain approach since the start of 2020, according to Data Golf. So he checks that box. Now, just the 52nd percentile in Bermuda putting, 61st percentile in strokes gained approach, but it's not that bad. And if one of these, one of the top seven doesn't win, I think Cameron Champ has a very good case to be in the mix for this week. Looking at Sam Burns, somewhat similar case as well. Very long off the tee. And look at this Bermuda putting, 90th percentile, both in Bermuda putting and distance gained. Fits that quick checklist. You want to target Sam Burns where you need to be long and when it's on Bermuda. So he has that going for him as well. And then Lanto Griffin doesn't quite have that distance so much, but has everything else. You can look here. 83rd percentile Bermuda putter, 89th percentile overall putter. Again, putting can sort of come and go, but putting is not completely random by any means. You can predict putting fairly well overall, and you know that you need to putt well in order to win almost always. So targeting guys who putt well is never a bad thing. Targeting guys who putt well and are, 70th percentile in long-term adjusted strokes gained tee to green for a salary of 10,000, or these win odds at 80-1 on FanDuel Sportsbook, that's very appealing. So I like Lanto Griffin as a long shot on FanDuel Sportsbook for sure. Maybe a better bet to win outright, maybe a better top 10 than he is on FanDuel, but Lanto Griffin, definitely somebody who stands out to me. Speaking of just looking at some betting odds, I'm going to jump over to my win simulation model and look at the very, very top. This is a pretty flat structure for this week. Patrick Cantlay leads with a 5.9% chance to win. The way that I get these is taking long-term adjusted form, fitting it a little bit to the course, but mostly letting the data do the talking. I try not to adjust things too much. Patrick Cantlay, under 6% chance to win, so it is pretty low for a favorite, but Patrick Reed, 5.8%. Scotty Scheffler, Tony Finau, 4.2%. Brooks Koepka, 3.5%. Sung Jae Im, 3.3%. So, I think that the realistic winner is going to come from the top. If we look just at these guys, throw in, Answer and Wolf, that combines for almost a third of the win equity between them. But if you compare them to their win odds on FanDuel Sportsbook, not a whole lot of great bets in terms of value if you assume these win simulations are correct. I don't let the win simulations do all the talking for me. I bet Joaquin Niemann at a good number last week, almost paid off. He second straight runner-up for Niemann, but I do let this do a lot of the work for me, and so that's going to lead me to Patrick Reed at the top if I'm betting a favorite. It's hard to get away from Patrick Reed for me this week based on the number that we're getting on FanDuel Sportsbook, especially at 19-1. He's just a better long-term adjusted golfer than I think the perception indicates, because he's Patrick Reed, so people don't really view him that way. But Patrick Reed, just one of the best golfers when adjusted for the fields in the entire world. So we get that at 19-1, which is pretty intriguing. He is one of the best betting. He actually is the best betting value for me this week. Lonto Griffin is number 2. I mentioned Lonto being a really balanced golfer, solid putter, long enough. That's someone who does rate out well for me in my win simulations, but also makes sense from just a course fit perspective. Again, these win simulations based in just long-term form, not so much what someone's done the past 2 weeks, which is not really that predictive of a sample. But I think Lonto Griffin checks the boxes at 80-1. If you can get him that number, it's very intriguing. Someone like Eric Van Rooyen, again, the win simulations like him more than I do. EVR, not a great putter overall. That's kind of his issue. Let's take a look at him. The win simulations like him, very good long-term adjusted form, just total strokes gained average, 82nd percentile, very good tee to green numbers. The around the green play, solid enough. It's the putting that kind of trails off, especially on Bermuda. It's a very tiny sample for him on Bermuda, which is surprisingly small, according to Fantasy National. But we know that if you don't putt well, it's going to be hard. So EVR is someone I'm usually okay just kind of giving into and targeting anyway from a FanDuel or a betting standpoint. But I'm trying to get away from bad putters. The overall data says he's probably not as bad as the Bermuda splits indicate, but I'm not particularly on EVR this week. Paul Casey, can make the case for him pretty much each and every week, just because he is, in a field where there's no runaway studs this week. Paul Casey's a lot easier to justify. If we look at him, we know what he does. We know what Paul Casey does. We know who he is. He can be at times the best ball striker in any field. 98th percentile long-term adjusted off the tee numbers, 99th percentile long-term approach numbers, very long off the tee as well. It's just the putting, the short game that is problematic. So Casey's not somebody that I'm particularly in on. But when I talk to Jim Sonis on the Heat Check, there are some golfers who I won't necessarily into, but I also wouldn't talk anybody out of. It's kind of where I am with Paul Casey right now. And honestly, not a ton of these up really draw my interest. Tom Hoagie, Matthew Neesmith are probably the next place I would look. Very, very low, 120-1 and 160-1 respectively. Again, you're looking at sub 1% chance to win for both of them. So, keep that in mind. But at 120, 160, you don't necessarily need a full unit bet even to get some value on those two. I think that they are very good, daily fantasy plays as well in the low end. I'm actually going to jump down there because to me, this week doesn't have a ton in the 9,000 range I'm particularly interested in. Maybe the low 9,000 range is more intriguing. I can say for sure the low 9,000 range is more intriguing than the upper 9,000 range for me. But if you jump back up to the top of this field, there's a pretty big gap in terms of skill and win equity between a Matthew Wolff and even a Cameron Champ or a Sam Burns or a Lonto Griffin. If we cherry pick the best golfers, our favorite golfers in this range. So I think there's probably a week where we de-emphasize balance and go more top heavy. If that includes getting Reed, Finau, Wolff in a lineup, and we gloss over the mid 9,000 range, I'm fine with that because the low 9,000 range on FanDuel, we have some good options. Taylor Gooch, a very balanced golfer overall, has missed 2 straight cuts, but missed one on the number, missed another by 1 shot. Pretty good scores in those. Fairly long off the tee for him, fairly good on Bermuda. Hard to cherry pick him. Doc Redman, not the longest driver by any means, so it's not the absolute best fit, but hard to argue against someone like Doc Redman, who just can be a really good tee to green golfer, 82nd percentile, and he's 82nd percentile tee to green despite being 7th percentile and strokes gained around the green. It's because the ball striking so. We can get someone like that who might not be completely terrible with the putting, 51st percentile, just long-term 37th percentile on Bermuda. That really checks out for me on FanDuel at 9,100. He's interesting. Charlie Hoffman, Cameron Tringali. Matthew NeSmith is someone that I've been talking about for a bit. I like him again this week for a salary of 8,500. We can look at him. 95th percentile long-term adjusted approach numbers. Pretty solid off the tee. Not the longest, but his red flag is primarily just around the green. We can see 16th percentile here, but 71st percentile Bermuda putter over a 45-round sample, which is it's not full of 100 rounds, but it's also not that small. But we do have someone like NeSmith to either bet, I would say maybe a top 10 rather than an outright, although that 160 number is very tempting. But at 8,500, he opens up a lot. And if he's the difference between getting from, Cameron Tringali and Cam Champ to NeSmith and Matthew Wolff, I think that's a very good trade-off in favor of NeSmith and Wolff, just because Wolff is a much better bet to win, much more likely to win. No matter what the win simulations say, we know and intuitively that Matthew Wolff is probably the better pick to win there between the two. Charles Schwartzel, Chesson Hadley. I mean, this thing really drops off this week. I'm okay with taking some chances this week, but that doesn't necessarily mean the 7,000 range. Yes, getting one golfer in the 7,000 range can really open things up. If I had to pick one, it'd be Will Gordon. I don't think you have to get there. If you just look at the win equity between these guys, it's very small. Their cut odds get really, really problematic down here. Making the cut this week is going to be pretty tricky because it is a full field. So I would keep that in mind. Even though I'm a little bit more top heavy, I don't think you need to get down and roster 2 golfers at 8,500 or below. I think NeSmith alone kind of does the trick. NeSmith and Gooch would be sort of my favorite two-man value stack this week. If I'm building a lot of lineups on FanDuel, it's going to be prioritizing 3 or 4 studs. Probably lock into Patrick Reed, Tony Finau, Wolff, probably Cameron Champ, and then rotate in some values as opposed to locking in the best values, which aren't really there. They have a flimsy case to be made for them. I'm much more inclined to target the top of the field for my FanDuel preferences, my FanDuel locks. They might not be 100% locks, but if these guys I'm playing 75, 80% of this week across, however many tournaments, honestly, 10, 100, whatever it is, those guys that you really key in on this week, it's going to be the studs for me, which is not always the case. Sometimes it's the value stands out, and we have, DJ, we have Justin Thomas, we have Rahm, Xander, Rory, and you don't know how to sort of nitpick between them, but we have some value. This is the opposite for me. Yes, I can make a case for Cantlay, Scheffler, Sungjae, Brooks as well, but I think this week is one where you pick your favorite studs and then rotate in the values on FanDuel. Again, I think that there's a pretty good case to be made for some long shot bets, specifically, Lonto at 80-1. It's just a very long number for him. For me, even Sam Burns at 50-1 draws some attention. Taylor Gucci at 85-1. But again, the number one bet for me at the top, if I had to bet only one golfer, one favorite, it's probably going to be Patrick Reed. I think I'm going to stick with that. I feel pretty good with his case. Very good, just a very good golfer, long enough. Hard to sort of nitpick Patrick Reed this week, but it's going to be a fun event. It's kind of always fun. We have enough big names, but we also have some up and coming names, which always makes it an intriguing event. It might not come down to a bunch of studs, but even we saw last week Joaquin Niemann, Kevin Na, Chris Kirk. It's still good golf, still fun golf, still engaging. So it doesn't really matter who this, who it is. I think that we're going to be in for a low scoring, pretty tight event this week, because the lower the scores go, generally the tighter things get at the top come Sunday down the stretch. But that's all I have for today. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Gdula13 or check out my DFS content on numberFire.com. Best of luck this week, and let's hit a winner.